chapter 6 is on the nutrition. So in this chapter, it's actually quite a big chapter, and we're going to see both the human, animal, and finally we're going to end up also with some plant nutrition. So first, we're going to see how the importance of nutrition, what type of nutrition we have available in our daily intake, and what's the importance of these balanced diet. So we're basically going to look on the balanced diet. We're going to see if just in case we are not taking certain food in a correct amount, we're going to see some kind of malnutrition, not enough nutrition for further intake and also for certain cellular processes. And we're going to see furthermore on the food digestion, how food that we take in are being digested, nutrients are being absorbed, and finally the waste are being released out of the body. It's important to keep our healthy digestive system and through eating a good balanced diet. And for photosynthesis, we're going to see how plants are taking all the material to convert it into a product which is useful for both the plant and also human. And we're going to see how certain factors around us are affecting the plant's photosynthesis. And we're going to see some of the important technology used in food production. So to begin with, we start with the animal digestion, and we're going to particularly looking on the cow digestion, which is the ruminant. Okay, so in ruminant, okay, so we can see the diagram showing digestion of cellulose, because basically the cow are taking all the grass, which is rich in cellulose. So cellulose is important for cow to take in because they don't eat other food. So we have this numbered part here. Okay, so we're gonna look at this all this number apart, so we know that how the flow look like. So before going further on these processes, let's look at some of the digestive tract of a ruminant, which is a cow. So they have certain structure here, which is called the rumen, which look like a stomach for the cow, and followed something called reticulum at the after the ending of the esophagus, and they do have something called omesum that is projecting from the reticulum, and another part continuing from omesum is called the abomesum, and finally abomesum will end up with the small intestine, and finally the food is out. So these are some of the part that is important to know, because each of these part are gonna take place on the digestion of this by cow. So as the cow eat the grass, which is contain all the cellulose, okay, grass contains cellulose. This grass will be broken down by an enzyme called cellulase. For example, like human, we do not have cellulase, but comparable to cow, these are ruminant which have a cellulase enzyme in the digestive tract, being produced by bacteria that live in the rumen area. Okay, by produced by the symbiotic bacteria. Symbiotic bacteria basically like a bacteria that live harmonized in the rumen, and they basically give you the cellulose for the cow. And after the food, the grass is actually being chewed and digested by cellulose, it first enter the reticulum area, and there's going to be more further hydrolysis where there's going to be water together with the material of grass being digested by cellulose, and now they are called the cut. And basically this cut is the one like look like a smash material. In this case, this cut will not go through the next step of the track, but it will be regurgitated back into the mouth. So basically it eat the material, digest it, in when it reach the reticulum, it just being actually pushed back to the mouth, and they will just again start to chew it again, the cut. So that's why we can see that most of the time the cow is very busy chewing a lot of things again and again. And after chewing for the second time, the cut is already here, and then they're going to move to the next part, which is the omesum. Yeah, so the cut will be slowly being reswallowed and swallowed until they reach the omesum, and all the large particles are being broken down into small pieces. So it's basically like grinding it into be more small pieces. After reaching the omesums, the small particle then move to the next track, which is the obimesum, and more digestion going to take place because of the enzymes available there. So they're going to basically complete the protein that present in the grass and also other food substances. So all the digestion going to more extensively happen in the obimesum. Finally, all the food that's being digested gonna come into the small intestine. All the nutrients will be reabsorbed, and whatever that is not required will be released out, excreted out as a feces. So these are the process that happening. So just recap, the grass will be taken in, will be digested by cellulase, and then the food will reach the reticulum and further being hydrolyzed into something called a cut, and later being pushed back into the mouth, and then further chewing is happening here. And then the food go to the next part, which is the omesum, and broken down into smaller pieces and go into the ibomesum. Digestion of enzyme take place, and then food finally reach into the small intestine. Nutrition is being absorbed, and finally is being released. So these are a very diagrammatic way to see how cow is actually digesting the grass that it take in. So looking more important is about human. So we're going to see how human are taking food in and what happened. So these are the table that's very in a summarized way, seeing that how food are being actually digested at each side of digestion. So we have start with mouth cavity, followed by stomach, and then food will go to something called duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine, and we're going to see the continuation. So let's start with the mouth cavity. In mouth cavity, usually we have enzymes which is present in the digestive juice, which is our saliva. So saliva is basically producing by the salivary gland, which is located around your cheek area. So in this mouth cavity, they are usually around the alkaline pH, about 6 to 7, nearly to neutral to an acidic. And because of this condition, the salivary amylase is basically able to actually act upon the starch material, like carbohydrate, food contain like bread and all the potatoes that we're taking in, will combine with salivary amylase in the saliva and will be broken down into a product called maltose. So if you remember, maltose is actually a disaccharide, it's actually a sugar. So still maltose is not a simple sugar yet. So this can be broken down, but the process stop here first, because this will be continued in the next step, which we'll see later. So we can always remember that mouth cavity is basically starch digestion by salivary amylase. Proceed some of the food will go through the stomach, and we have something called the gastric juice. Gastric refer to the term which refer to stomach, and gastric juice basically need a pH of very acidic condition. We can see about 1.5 to 2. So that's why our stomach is contain a lot of hydrochloric acid. Whatever food that we take in will be digested by gastric juice, as well as all the microorganism that uh, contaminating the food will be actually killed during this hydrochloric acid. At this level, we can see that protein and also the casinogen. Casinogen is basically present in the milk most of the time. So babies will have most of casinogen in their stomach. So protein will be broken down into a polypeptide by an enzyme called pepsin. So pepsin required acidic pH in this case. And even polypeptide is not a small molecule yet. They can be broken down into more simpler, which will go to the next part. And in sense of casinogen, it will be broken down into something called casein by an enzyme called renin. And mostly it happen in the baby because baby are taking more of milk product. So next part is about the duodenum, which is the first part of small intestine. In the duodenum, we have two important juices, which is the bile salt, produced by the liver and stored in the gallbladder. And we have also pancreatic juice being produced by the pancreas. And this is about alkaline pH. We already reached the duodenum. In this case, we're going to see all the material, be it a carbohydrate, a protein, or also the fat are going to be broken down. So starch also can be broken down here by not salivary, but it's a pancreatic amylase into maltose. In case of the polypeptide being digested during the stomach time, will be actually converted into peptide. Even peptide is not a simple molecule yet, but it will be digested by the trypsin. And in case of the lipid droplets, where the fat emulsion are going to take place, will be broken down by lipase enzyme into fatty acid and glycerol. In case of fat, this is already a simple molecule. so that can be actually absorbed by the small intestine, by the vilus or the small intestine. So just recap again, the mouth contains the salivary amylase where starch breakdown going to take place. In case of stomach, we have the gastric juice where protein will be digested by pepsin into polypeptide. And duodenum, we have the bile salt and pancreatic juice where it's going to digest the starch, polypeptide, and the fat. Continuation of this is the ileum. From the duodenum, we're going to go into the ileum, which is the second part of the small intestine, where we have more of the intestinal juice. And all the intestinal juice going to break down different component of the food. For example, we have carbohydrate made up of all these the disaccharides, okay, complex sugar. Maltose will be broken down into two molecule of glucose by maltase. It's easy to remember. Maltose will be a uh, enzyme by maltase. By in case of lactose, will be actually digested into glucose, and also galactose by enzyme lactase. Lactase. This is all the milk product. And in case of sucrose, the plant sugar will be actually broken down into glucose and also the fructose by sucrase. So all of these disaccharides, the complex sugar, will be broken down into a simple sugar. And this sugar is something that can be absorbed by the small intestine as a nutrient for energy and so on. In case of protein, we have the peptide, which is can be broken down into amino acid. So in this case, it's like erepsin, or in a easy way, you can actually put also protease enzymes in this case, where amino acid is the simple form which can be absorbed. So we have carbohydrate breaking down at ileum and also the protein by a few specific enzymes here. So moving forward, we're going to see what happened after it's being digested, which is the process of absorption. So what you are seeing in this diagram is um, a part of the small intestine, which is called the villi. So villi look like this. We can see there are some epithelial cells up here, which is a bit orangey color. And we also have specific cells called the goblet cells. And we have in the middle the green color, which is the lacteal. And we have all the blue and the red color part, which is the artery and the vein, which is the blood capillaries, and branching down is the bigger version of the blood vessels. So if you can see in this diagram, we have this villi structure which is adapted for nutrient absorption. So let's see some of the nutrient adaptation features. First, we can see there are a lot of villi present at this small intestine, because there's a lot of these villi. You're going to increase the surface area for more absorption of food. So more number of villi, increase surface area, more absorption. And you can see that the epithelial cell is very thin wall, and because if it's thin wall, there's going to be easy absorption of food. That's not going to be difficulty. If the epithelial cell is very thick, then it's going to be more difficult to be absorbed. Next, I have explained that it's a lot of blood capillaries here. So blood capillaries is important because after it's actually being absorbed, it's going to enter into the blood capillary, and it's basically going to transport all the digested nutrients into the circulatory system, and going to reach basically all part of the body. So network of blood capillaries is important. And we saw this green structure in the middle of these villas is basically called the lacteal. And lacteal is specifically for the fat material, which is the fatty acids, and also the glycerol. So only these two material will be absorbed into the green structure of the lacteal. The rest of glucose, all the protein will go into the blood capillaries. So these are some of the adaptation of a villi in sense of this. So we already see that fatty acids and glycerol are the fat material, and they're going to go into the lacteal. And we do have some of the vitamins which are fat soluble, which is the vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. They all are only soluble in the fat. Comparable of other vitamins, they are more in water soluble. In case of I explained on the glucose, which is the carbohydrate, and also the amino acids, which are the protein part, will go into the blood capillaries in case of by a facilitated diffusion. So if you remember your chapter movement of substance, your chapter from third chapter, it's basically required carrier protein to go through into the cells. Water also will be absorbed here, but water gonna take a process of osmosis, because water is all about uh, osmosis in sense of transport. So just recap again, fatty acids gonna go through the lacteal, the green part here, where all the glucose, amino acids gonna enter the blood circulation. And finally, it will go to the bigger branch of arterial and venule and reaching the circulatory system, and later distribute to all part of the body. So we're going to see how further on food that is already being taken in. Imagine the food is now already reached certain places, like we already reaches the blood capillaries, and now it need to be transported to other parts of the organ of the body. So in case of glucose, it will be transported to liver via a small pathway, a small shortcut, which is called the hepatic portal vein, where the glucose will be taken out by the body cells. For example, if a person is running and the person need more energy, and glucose will go to the muscles, and where the respiration, cellular respiration going to take place in the mitochondria of the muscle present in the muscle cells, and then basically going to produce more of energy from them. If there's a lot of glucose being actually available there, in case you're taking a lot of food that rich in carbohydrate, the body will not require it. It will be actually converted into a temporary storage called the glycogen, and later it's also being stored in liver. So if you require glucose later, in sense of you're having starvation or you're not eating in the proper amount of food that contain glucose, then the body will actually give a signal that the glycogen that being stored in the liver previously to be actually converted back into glucose, and the glucose will be basically going to take back again, go into the cellular respiration and producing more energy. So these are an example of how glucose is being absorbed, being used by the body cells, and finally how it produces energy. So in this case, this is on the protein, which is the amino acid, the simple molecule of the protein. Again, similar like glucose, will be absorbed first into the blood capillaries, followed by transport into liver by a small shortcut, which is called the hepatic portal vein. And in this sense, the liver will synthesize some of the plasma protein. For example, we have the globulins, like immunoglobulin, which is important antibodies for defense mechanism. We have also albumin, which are important for the blood regulation. Okay, we have the one I mentioned before. We have clothing mechanism. We also have albumin, important for osmoregulation. If we are taking too much of protein food, there'll be an excess. So this excess is actually will be broken down by the liver, which is the place of amino acid breakdown. And this process is called deamination. Basically, de means removal of amine group from the amino acids. So if they are undergo deamination, the product is something called urea. And urea is actually not required by the body, and it basically excreted out through urine. And we know that amino acid is an important molecule because it's important to produce enzymes, because enzymes are all protein. And we also learn a lot of hormones in our body, and all the hormones are basically producing by the endocrine gland, and these are being produced by the amino acids. So amino acids will be actually used for all these purposes, and if they are not required, broken down in a process called deamination and excreted as urea through urine. So let's see on the fats. So in the case of fats, as I mentioned, we have fats molecule, which is the fatty acids, and so glycerol. I also explained on the vitamin soluble ADEK. In the case of previous glucose and protein, they are going to enter into the blood capillaries. But for fatty acids, all the fat materials not into capillaries, but into something called the lacteal, which is the green structure we saw. Since these are the lymphatic vessels, okay, they're going to actually drain into the subclavian vein, which is located near your shoulder. So subclavian vein is near your shoulder, where it will actually return back into the bloodstream, into the circulatory system. So all the material, for example, the lipid component like phospholipid is important for the plasma membrane. If you remember your chapter 3 form 4, we have the plasma membrane made up of phospholipid bilayer. So that's how we're getting the phospholipid for the plasma membrane. And then in this case, we have a lot of excess lipid. For example, eating too much of fast food contain like fried food, and those are lipid fat material that are excess. It would need to be stored. In this case, it will be stored into a fatty tissue called the adipose tissue. We can see adipose tissue in most of the skin area. It's actually the lowest in your skin, starting from the upper covering of the skin, where we have the lowest part, which is the adipose tissue. And basically, adipose tissue is where all the uh, temporary storage for energy. If you do not have enough of glucose, your fat material will give you the secondary supply of energy. So this is how we saw the carbohydrate and absorption and assimilation of glucose. We also go through the protein, and finally we also saw about the fatty material. So we are done with the absorption of the material for the human, and we're going to see an example what happened in the plant. So in case of plant, we're going to see plant obviously not going to eat like human. They do not walk and find a food, but they will produce food by themselves. So this is called the autotroph. Basically, they produce food by themselves. In case of human and animal, they call heterotroph because they have to depend on other living things for a source of nutrition. So before we go into the process, let's appreciate this diagram because we have certain parts here that are responsible for certain processes here. So let's start from the outer. This is the outer part of a leaf. Okay, and this is structure of leaf. This is the inner. This is the next outer part of a leaf. These are all the inner structure. So imagine this is the upper part of the leaf. We can see that the leaf is being covered by a waxy cuticle. Waxy cuticle is basically like a candle structure, okay, because it's going to be waxy. So it's going to actually prevent water loss. It's like waterproof. We know the candle are waterproof. They're going to prevent water loss. So the leaf will not actually always removing the water. So it will be actually preserving in water for the leaf, for the plant structure. Below the waxy cuticle, we have something called the upper epidermis because we do have the lower epidermis here. This is the lower epidermis. This is the upper epidermis. So upper epidermis is transparent in nature because when the light want to go into the cells, okay, it can actually penetrate through these layers. So we have the upper epidermis, which is the transparent to allow the light to go in. Following the upper epidermis, we have these cells, which look like fans and arranged nicely. Okay, these cells are called the palisade mesophyll cells. Okay, and they are quite packed, nicely arranged. And in this case, you can see the yellow color, okay, dotted here. This imagine this is your chloroplast. Okay, since they have contained a lot of chloroplasts, we can say that palisade mesophyll cell is the place where all the photosynthesis is going to take in the maximum rate here. Okay, following palisade mesophyll cells, we have the another cells which is arranged not in a very nice way. They are irregular here. These are called the spongy. So please always remember that above is always palisade, arranged nicely, and spongy is not in a good way. It's already in an irregular shape. And these cells are responsible for the gas exchange. Okay, carbon dioxide going in and oxygen going out. It's all going to take place here. And we do have some extra air space here, which is for the air to go in and out. So these are some of the part important in these areas. And we're going to come into the important part of the transport, which is the vascular bundle. So vascular bundle is made up of two tissue. The above one, which is called the xylem. And xylem, remember, it's easy. It's only for water and mineral transport. Whereas the below part, which is a bit darker in the, blue, is the phloem. Okay, and phloem is where all the product of photosynthesis, example, it producing all the glucose are going to be stored here. So this is for water. This is for food of the plant. Below here at the lower epidermis, we have like someone who's guarding the opening and the closing. So these are called the guard cells, as how they can open, they can close according to the situation. These are called the guard cells. And the middle that I'm showing right now is the opening, which is called the stomata, or we call stoma in singular. So these guard cells will open and close stomata according to the, if there's carbon dioxide a lot, then you're going to take more in, then they're going to open. If there's too much of sunlight and too much of temperature is high, they're going to close because they want to keep the water inside. So this is how the structure of a plant basically helping the leaf to continue their photosynthesis, to maintain the gas and also maintain the water. So the next important part is about the mechanism of the photosynthesis. So in this case, we're going to see how first light is important. So in light reaction, basically taking place in the daytime, we have the chlorophyll present in the chloroplast, going to capture all the light, all the energy from the sunlight, and basically going to be some electron excitation happening in the chlorophyll molecule. And because of the light present and also water during the reaction, they basically going to break down this water by light into hydrogen ion, also the hydroxyl ion. This ion is important because they're going to form the next product. So all the hydrogen ion, all the electron from the chlorophyll will form a hydrogen atom. Okay, and during the light reaction, energy is being formed because during this daytime you can basically produce more of energy, and energy will be stored at this time. And the later part, all the hydroxyl will be lost, but hydrogen is all going to be retained because this hydrogen will be used for the dark reaction. The available hydroxyl will be broken down into the water and also oxygen. So we can basically see energy being produced. Water and oxygen is also being produced at the light reaction. But we do have remaining carbohydrate product by photosynthesis, which is glucose, which will not happen in the light reaction, but it's going to take place in the dark reaction during the night time. So in the night time also, this reaction going to continue where they have all the hydrogen atom that previously remained here, and gonna be a carbon dioxide as well. They're gonna be a series of reaction taking place by enzymes responsible for photosynthesis. They're basically gonna form the glucose molecule, and this glucose will be actually used by the plant, and oxygen will be released during this light reaction for human to take in, and also water at the byproduct. So just recap, during light reaction we have the sunlight and we do have water, and because of this action the hydrogen and hydroxyl ion will be released. Hydrogen will be actually stayed inside the chlorophyll. At the same time, energy is being produced. But in case of hydroxyl ion, which is the OH, will be broken down to form water and also the oxygen. And the process will continue at the night time in the process of dark reaction. And in the dark reaction, glucose is basically being produced. So these are how the mechanism look like. The next one will discuss what's the difference between these light and also dark reaction in more detail. So in this table, light reaction obviously it happen in the daytime, and the dark reaction it particularly happening at the night, at the same time at day, because glucose also will be produced during this time. So as the name says. And in differences of the side of reaction is granum is where the chlorophyll part also, and stroma also the part of chlorophyll. Granum is where the light reaction take place, and for dark reaction is in the stroma. And in this case, we know that during light reaction, sunlight will break down the water. So light reaction need water. In case of dark reaction, they're going to produce glucose, and glucose contain carbon compound, so they need carbon dioxide. And the product of light is obviously water and oxygen. And during the dark reaction is glucose. And photolysis of water will only occur in the light reaction, but not in the dark reaction, because at this stage where all the hydrogen atom will be produced. In case of light energy, we need light here because sunlight is required here. In case a dark reaction, they do not require sunlight. So that's why it can happen at the night time. In case of energy, which is the ATP, they're going to form the energy, and they're going to actually keep the hydrogen atom. In case of the dark, they're going to use the preserved energy and also the preserved hydrogen atom. So these are some of the important differences that you should know about light reaction and also dark reaction of the photosynthesis. Let's see in more a diagram way. Okay, so these are how we can differentiate first the light reaction during the daytime and dark reaction mostly in the night and also day. We start with the water here. Okay, water will be broken down into hydrogen ion and also the hydroxyl ion. And with the electron present, it will be converted into hydrogen atom. This is ion, this is atom right now. And similarly, with the presence of electron, hydroxyl ion will be converted into the hydroxyl atom, and this will be later converted into water, and oxygen will be released. And the available hydrogen atom later will be used for conversion of carbon dioxide into the uh, carbohydrate. In this case, is a glucose. And glucose actually can be converted to other product like starch, which is the storage material of plant. We have the sucrose, which is the plant sugar, which is sweet, and amino acid protein for the plant to grow, and uh, fatty acids, which is the lipid part of the plant structure. So these are how light and dark reaction differentiate in photosynthesis. So before the end this chapter, we'll see the concept of nutrition in a very short to recap is. So as I mentioned before, we have nutrition on something called heterotroph. Heterotroph, basically they can't produce by themselves the food, they need to depend on other organism. Saprophytism is basically saprophytes which actually eat the dead material. So basically we can imagine all the some fungus that live on the bark of a tree that's already died. They're going to basically eat the decaying material. Some parasites are depending on certain living organism. They're going to just take all the nutrient from the plant, and basically they can kill the organism. In case of holozoic basically they can digest, they can absorb the food, like most of human and like animal are holozoic nutrition in this case. So we learn about digestion. We see how the food is being digested into simple product, absorbed and being used by the body. And finally, if the food is not required, then we're going to have a process called defecation, removing by producing feces. In case of like autotroph, we already see the case of plant. So plant really require a lot of nutrients for them to actually survive. And particularly we talk about photosynthesis, light reaction and dark reaction, and where the light reaction going to produce oxygen and water, dark reaction going to produce the glucose. And there are certain temperature, certain humidity going to affect these photosynthesis. In case of the ruminant, which is the cow, we saw certain part how the grass is actually being taken in and the cut is being produced, and later will be actually re-swallowed back. And then that's going to be different with rodent, and rodent will see some example later part of it. In case of malnutrition, if you're not taking certain food in correct amount, we will have some malnutrition. Example, like we have protein malnutrition, carbohydrate malnutrition. And it's important to have a good eating habit. If you're not eating properly, you may get gastritis, which is the inflammation of the stomach. And if too much of intake of food that is not required by the body will be converted into fat, and this will result in something called obesity. Anorexia nervosa is a condition, is actually a disorder where the person will try not to eat because they feel afraid if they eat too much, and then they feel they'll get fat. So they basically gonna avoid eating. So these condition is called anorexia nervosa. And finally, we have some condition called bulimia, where the person wanted to eat, they will eat, and later they will vomit out, so that the food will basically not going to take into the digestion. So these are some of the disorders and some of the important of we need to eat healthy. So let's move on with some example of question. So the first one is on the something called the fat digestion. Triglyceride, tri means three, glyceride is the part of fat. So this is how the fat molecule going to look like. So they're going to be P combined with Q with a process of X going to produce the triglyceride, and the byproduct is something called the water. So by looking to this, we already know that P is actually the glycerol, which is one molecule of it, and they have three molecules of the fatty acids. Combining these two will form the triglycerides. That's why it's tri means three of the fatty acids. So what is the process of X? Is basically one molecule of glycerol will be condensed. In this sense, water will be removed. Okay, water removed. That's why we have water as the byproduct, and they will form something called triglyceride. Triglyceride is a type of lipid, and state the function of a lipid. Basically, they give you energy. apart from carbohydrate, and they also maintain body temperature. That's why people in the western area, which is the area which is very cold, they will take a lot of meat in this case, because they need more of heat to maintain their body temperature. Comparable here, we do not need to take much of fat products. This diagram show a cross section. Basically, cross section is cutting of the certain parts, and this is actually blood vessels. And you can see this blood vessel is made up of muscular wall. Lumen is the middle opening, and there's some kind of yellow colored product, which is the deposit X. So the question is asking basically what caused this deposit X going to be there. This X deposit is basically the fat inside your blood vessels. So when you're taking too much of a fat product, there's going to be accumulation of fat in your blood vessels, and that can lead to cardiovascular disease. It can be any disease like heart attack. It can be also a problem with stroke when the blood will supply to your brain. When these lipid going to accumulate, they're going to basically make it more smaller and smaller and smaller in case become narrower, and then the blood can't actually go through quite easily and basically slow down, and finally the cells after that part not going to reach the not going to have the blood, not going to have the oxygen, and finally can lead to cell death. So what is the practice to avoid this kind of issue? Is basically consume less oily or fat food, or more fibers, and more, if you want to eat, make sure you eat according to the food pyramid that we know. So these are another question on the rat, which is the rodent. Okay, this is the structure of a rodent of a rat. Okay, looks similar like human, but in this case they are more simpler. So we have few structure like stomach here, and we also have caecum here. So name the part where contain microorganism for cellulose, because rat also eat grass. So in this case, caecum is where the cellulose present. So how microorganism present in this caecum gonna benefit the rat? So basically, microorganism that live in the digestive tract of rat will actually give you the cellulose, will give you more of a suitable condition. So when the rat eat the grass, it actually can break down and can take the nutrient for the rat to ingest and absorb. I think we saw this previously. This is the cow tract system, and we have all the chambers, which is reticulum, rumen, omesum, and abomesum. So how basically this question is asking, starting beginning of the digestion of grass which contains cellulose. First, we need to mention that the cow actually chew the grass. First enter the first part, which is the rumen, and we have the enzyme cellulose going to break down into something called cud, and cud will return back into the mouth slowly, and then the cow will continue chewing it. When it's done with the chew, it's actually going to swallow and reaching the first part, which is the omesum, and then broken down, and then later it go to the omesum. All the enzymes going to break down, and finally it will complete the grass which contains the cellulose. And then if it's not required, then it's going to come out as feces to be excreted out. This is the complete of a digestive system of human. Okay, starting from mouth, later go to the stomach. Here we have the small intestine and large intestine. Finally, end up with the anus. So we are going to see the first question. Label the structure Q. So it's quite obvious. It's actually ileum, because the duodenum is here. Duodenum is the first part of the small intestine. This is the second part, and the third part is ending here. So you can write ileum, which is the better answer. If you feel that you're still not sure, then small intestine is fine. But the best answer is ileum, because it's showing the second part of the small intestine. So the continuation of structure Q basically is asking how it's being adapted. We actually saw something called villus or villi. They have a lot of villi, increase the surface area. There's a lot of blood capillaries. So a lot of blood capillary help in absorption of nutrient. State the enzyme that digests fat in the Q. If you remember that we have fat digestion in the intestine, and it's done by lipase. So fat is lipid. Remember it easily, lipase is the enzyme. So how starch is being hydrolyzed? In this case, in duodenum, not in the mouth. So in the duodenum, there'll be something called pancreatic amylase, but in the mouth, it's called the salivary amylase. So break down the starch into the complex sugar called maltose. The next question is more of your okay, what question? You have to think in a higher skill level. If a person is drinking too much of orange juice, okay, what happened to the starch digestion? So in this case, like for digestion to occur, it need to be around 7 to 8, and we know that orange juice is actually acidic nature, so that gonna increase more acids in the stomach, where starch need alkaline to neutral pH. So starch would be slow, they're going to take place, but it's going to be slow. So you should take too much of orange juice. It should be in the limited according to your balanced diet and food pyramid. So with that, we see some of the example of the nutrition.